What if Meld cards were fusion monsters? Let's start things off with Chittering Host, an Eldrazi horror creature with 5 attack and 6 toughness. With haste, this creature can attack or use tap abilities the turn it's summoned. Menace, this creature can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures, and the effect: when Chittering Host enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +1 attack and gain Menace until the end of the turn. If you notice, I didn't tell you the cost of this card. That's because it doesn't have one, as this card cannot be normally cast, instead requiring 2 different creatures to be on your side of the field first, being Midnight Scavengers, a 5 cost, 3 attack, and 3 toughness human rogue creature with 4 generic and 1 black, with the effect: when Midnight Scavengers enter the battlefield, you may return 1 target creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to your hand. And Graph Rats, a 2 cost, 2 attack, and 1 toughness rat creature with 1 generic and 1 black, and the effect: at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you both own and control Graph Rats and a creature named Midnight Scavengers, exile them and meld them into Chittering Host. If Chittering Host were to be converted into Yu-Gi-Oh, it would become a level 7 Dark Attribute Fiend Fusion monster with 2400 attack and 2750 defense, and the fusion requirements: Graph Rats plus 1 warrior monster, and the effect: if Chittering Host is fusion summoned, all of your other monsters can make a second attack on monsters during each battle phase until the end of the turn. While this card is face up on the field, all of your other monsters gain 300 attack. This card can make a second attack on monsters during each battle phase. Although fusion monsters seem identical to Meld creatures, there are some major differences. The first one being the fusion requirements to summon, as Meld cards require the original card names on the field, while fusion monsters don't care about original names as much. In fact, many fusion monsters are very loose with their summoning requirements, generally requiring 1 specifically named card and 1 other type of card. Second, fusion monsters generally require a fusion spell to be summoned, using cards from your hand, field, or wherever designated by the card. I gave Chittering Host the ability to make a second attack on monsters to replicate the effect of Menace, as in Yu-Gi-Oh, not only do monsters declare attacks one at a time, the attacker chooses the targets, unlike in Magic, where your opponent chooses what and how many creatures to block with. I didn't give Chittering Host haste, however, since monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh can attack and use abilities the turn they are summoned, it would be redundant if I did. I made Chittering Host level 7, as if you combine the converted mana values of Graph Rats and Midnight Scavengers, you would get a generic mana value of 7. Since Graph Rats are a mandatory fusion material, I'll have to add them as a level 2 Dark Attribute Beast monster with 1050 attack and 0 defense, with the effect: at the start of the damage step, fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters on the field as fusion material, including this card. I gave Graph Rats the ability to fusion summon without a fusion spell, as there are other monsters that can perform the same thing, known as a contact fusion by the community, by using monsters already on the field, and with no other fusion card. The next card to be converted is Mishra, lost to Phyrexia, a legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Artificer, with 9 attack and 9 toughness, with the effect: whenever Mishra, lost to Phyrexia, enters the battlefield or attacks, choose 3. Target opponent discards 2 cards. Mishra deals 3 damage to any target. Destroy target artifact or planeswalker. Creatures you control gain Menace and Trample. If this creature would deal enough damage to his blocker to destroy them, deal the excess damage to the defending player or planeswalker. And until the end of the turn, creatures you don't control gain -1/-1 until the end of the turn, and create 2 tapped Power Stone tokens. With the effect: tap this card, add 1 generic mana. This mana cannot be spent to cast non-artifact spells. Of course, in order to be summoned, they must first be melded with Phyrexian Dragon Engine, a 3 generic cost, 2/2 artifact creature, Phyrexian Dragon, with Double Strike. This card deals combat damage before other creatures without first strike, and then regular combat damage to the same target if there are no other blockers. And the effect, when Phyrexian Dragon Engine enters the battlefield from your graveyard, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. It also has the effect, on Earth, pay 3 generic and 2 red to return the creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And Mishra, claimed by Gix, a 4-cost, 3/5 legendary creature, Phyrexian Human Artificer, with 2 generic, 1 red, and 1 black. And the effect, whenever you attack, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of attacking creatures. When you declare attackers, if Mishra, claimed by Gix, and a creature named Phyrexian Dragon Engine are attacking, and you both own and control them, exile them, then meld them into Mishra, lost to Phyrexia. It enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. If Mishra, lost to Phyrexia, were to be converted into Yu-Gi-Oh, it would become a level 10 fire attribute machine fusion monster with 3200 attack and 3100 defense. And the fusion requirements, Phyrexian Dragon Engine plus Mishra, claimed by Gix, and 1 fire attribute monster. And the effect, if this card is fusion summoned or attacks, choose 2 effects. You can only apply each effect of Mishra, lost to Phyrexia, once per turn. Your opponent discards 2 cards. Inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. Destroy 1 card your opponent controls. All monsters your opponent controls lose 400 attack and defense until the end of the turn. Summon 2 Power Stone tokens. Rock type, Earth attribute, level 1 with 0 attack and 0 defense. In defense position. They cannot be tributed for a tribute summon. Cannot be used as material for a fusion, Sychro, or link summon during the turn they are summoned. All other monsters can make a second attack on monsters during each battle phase until the end of the turn. If a monster you control attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. To start things off, Mishra, lost to Phyrexia, becomes a level 10 monster and requires 1 more fire attribute monster to be summoned, as its high stat line of 3200 and 3100 defense demands a level higher than 7, and the amount of effects this card does requires at least 3 monsters to be fusion summoned, as even 2 named monsters is still not enough for the sheer amount this card can do. I reduced the amount of effects this card can activate to 2 per trigger, as 3 would be way too many effects for any given moment. Mishra deals 3 damage to any target, turns into 1000 damage to your opponent, as in Yu-Gi-Oh, monsters don't have health points and thusly cannot take damage. Just like Graph Rats, I'll have to add Phyrexian Dragon Engine and Mishra, claimed by Gix, into Yu-Gi-Oh, becoming Phyrexian Dragon Engine, a level 3 fire attribute machine monster with 1000 attack and 1100 defense. And the effect, this card can make a second attack on monsters during each battle phase. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles a monster with original defense less than the attack of this card, destroy that monster. Once per turn, you can discard a level 5 or higher fire attribute monster from your hand to special summon Phyrexian Dragon Engine from the graveyard. When this card is special summoned from the graveyard, you can banish your hand face down, then draw 2 cards. You can only use this effect of Dragon Engine once per turn. Even though Double Strike sounds like a creature can attack twice each battle phase, it does a little bit more, allowing you to attack your opponent's creature first, and then dealing normal combat damage. However, if your opponent only declares 1 blocker or no blockers, you can only attack once or twice on the same creature. I made it so it can only perform a second attack on monsters, and the destruction effect to mimic attacking first. I changed the discard effect of Phyrexian Dragon Engine to removing cards from play face down instead, since drawing extra cards in Yu-Gi-Oh is so much better than in Magic, as Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have a cost system to limit how much you can do in a turn, and instead must make harsher restrictions to limit effects. Banishing face down is a much harsher requirement, as there are less ways to recover those cards once removed from play than those discarded. And since cards banished face down can't activate their effects, you don't gain any additional advantage from this cost. Even then, I still had to reduce the cards drawn to 2, since drawing 3 cards needs even more restrictions, especially since it has a way of summoning itself from the graveyard. Finally, I made this card an optional when effect to draw cards, giving your opponent a chance to stop the effect. Mishra, claimed by Gix, would become a level 4 fire attribute spellcaster with 1600 attack and 2100 defense, and the effect: if a monster you control declares an attack, deal 300 damage to your opponent and then gain 300 life points. At the start of the damage step, fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters on the field as fusion material, including this card. The last card to be converted into a fusion card is Brella, Voice of Nightmares, a legendary creature Eldrazi angel with 9 attack and 10 toughness. With flying, this card can only be blocked by creatures with flying or reach. First strike, this card deals combat damage before other creatures without first strike. Vigilance, attacking doesn't cause this creature to tap, and lifelink. You gain health equal to the amount of damage dealt by this creature, and the effect: your opponents can't cast spells with mana value 3 or less. Melded together from Bruna, the Fading Light, a 7-cost, 5/7 legendary creature angel horror with 5 generic and 2 white. With flying, vigilance, and the effect: when you cast a spell, you may return target angel or human creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And Gistella, the Broken Blade, a 4-cost, 4/3 legendary creature angel horror with 2 generic and 2 white. With flying, first strike, lifelink, and the effect: at the beginning of your end step, if you both own and control Gistella, the Broken Blade, and a creature named Bruna, the Fading Light, exile them, then meld them into Brella, Voice of Nightmares. Converting these cards gets us Brella, Voice of Nightmares, a level 11 dark attribute fairy fusion monster with 2850 attack and 3150 defense. And the fusion requirements: Bruna, the Fading Light, plus Gistella, the Broken Blade, plus 1 fiend monster. And the effect: must first be special summoned from the extra deck by sending above cards from the field to the graveyard. You do not use polymerization. This card can attack directly, but when it does so using this effect, the battle damage inflicted to your opponent is halved. This card can attack while in defense position. If this card attacks while in defense position, apply the attack of this card for damage calculation. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, gain life points equal to the damage inflicted. If this card destroys a monster and sends it to the graveyard, gain life points equal to that monster's original defense in the graveyard. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles a monster with original defense lower than the attack of this card, destroy that monster. When monsters of levels, ranks, or links 3 or lower would be special summoned, negate the summon, and if you do, destroy that card. Negate the activation of all normal spell cards, and if you do, destroy that card. This card has an extra requirement of a fiend monster to be fusion summoned, for the same reason Mishra has it for its stats, levels, and effects. However, I made Brella require a fiend monster, as even though it's 2 angels being fused together, a dark force is pulling them together. So it's only fair to add a fiend into the mix. This card is also different than the other converted fusion cards, as it actively prevents the use of fusion cards to be fusion summoned. While this may seem to be much better, since you don't need a fusion card to summon the monster, getting the materials on the field is a much more difficult task, as in Yu-Gi-Oh, you only have 1 normal summon a turn, meaning you'll have to go through multiple hoops to get the monsters on the field, not to mention normally summoning monsters with levels 5 or higher require tributing monsters on your side of the field. I did this to balance the effect of negating all normal spell cards, as many decks use normal spell cards to start their plays, from breaking boards to adding cards to their hand. And while it's not as good as negating all spell cards, normal spell cards are the closest thing that costs 3 or lower spells. I also included negating the special summon of monsters, levels, ranks, or links 3 or lower, as Brella negates all spells, including creature spells. Attacking directly is the closest thing to flying, as the keyword is the most common form of evasion. essentially letting you attack directly. And because this card can attack directly, I had to have all battle damage when it does so using this effect, as monsters that can attack directly usually have an attack of 1500 or less, while attacking in defense position is not exactly the same as not being tapped after attacking. It at least gets the intention of vigilance, allowing you to attack and defend at the same time. Since monsters don't have health, First Strike becomes an instant destruction effect to cards with less defense than this card's attack, functionally being the same, since if First Strike didn't kill them, then combat resumes normally. Adding Gistella and Bruna gets us Bruna, the Fading Light, becoming a level 7 light attribute fairy monster with 2350 attack and 2750 defense, with the effect: if this card is normal or special summoned, target one fairy or warrior monster in your graveyard, special summon it. You can only use the effect of Bruna, the Fading Light, once per turn. This card can attack directly, but when it does so using this effect, battle damage inflicted to your opponent is halved. This card can attack while in defense position. If this card attacks while in defense position, apply the attack of this card for damage calculation. This card summons either a fairy or warrior monster from the graveyard, because warrior is the closest type you can get to human type in Yu-Gi-Oh! Gistella, the Broken Blade, becomes a level 6 light attribute fairy monster with 1550 attack and 1150 defense. This card can attack directly. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, gain life points equal to the damage inflicted. If this card destroys a monster and sends it to the graveyard, gain life points equal to that monster's original defense in the graveyard. At the start of the damage step, if this monster battles a monster with original defense less than the attack of this card, destroy that monster. The reason why I make Gistella a level 6 fairy monster is because of all of the other effects on this card. I also didn't give it the effect Fusion Summon one monster from your extra deck using monsters on the field as fusion materials, because it's redundant to have for the summon of a contact fusion monster. The only reason why the other cards got this effect is because they have the option to fuse without a fusion card, while it's a mandatory requirement to summon Brella. If there's anything I should have changed or any ideas on cards I should convert next, please let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, you should check out this one, where I converted Magic's Happy Holiday cards into Yu-Gi-Oh! And Hearthstone.
Look at some of these more recent cards. First, see how many words are on them, and if we flip them over, they merge into an even bigger card. What?